stench hit them first, 20,000 decaying corpses don't just assault the eyes, they overwhelm every sense. Battle-hardened Ottoman soldiers witnessing the horror retched where they stood. Sultan Mehmed, the very conqueror of Constantinople, rode toward the Wallachian capital, expecting to face a city preparing for siege. What he found instead would haunt him for the rest of his life. A forest, yet not one of trees. The grotesque forest was made up of human beings impaled on stakes, their bodies at various stages of decay, some still twitching in agony after days of suffering. And at the center, the tallest stake bore the lifeless form of Hamza Pasha Mehmed's own general draped in ceremonial robes. In the next few moments, you'll uncover the most terrifying truth about the real Dracula evidence, hidden by medieval chroniclers, about a man so brutal and sadistically inventive that even hardened conquerors fled at the sight of his work. I hope everyone helps me with a like and a subscription, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. But what's even more unsettling? This wasn't some fictional monster or myth. It was a real man, one who learned that a human body could survive for 3 days impaled on a stake if done with enough care. I'm about to reveal exactly how he learned this dark skill and how a childhood spent in chains created one of the most terrifying rulers in European history. Winter 1431, Sigishora, Transylvania. In a stone house marked with the symbol of a dragon, a woman screams through childbirth. The child that emerges into the world will one day make 20,000 people scream in horror, far worse than what they can imagine. They name him Vlad after his father, but history will know him by the name that would strike fear across 2 continents, Dracula, the son of the dragon. His father, Vlad II Dracul, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order sworn to defend Europe from Ottoman invasion. Dracul means dragon in Romanian, and his son would be known as Dracula. But the name that would instill terror was not derived from his lineage. It was born from the brutal execution method that would become his trademark impaling. Consider the world into which this child was born. The Ottoman Empire was rapidly expanding westward like a deadly plague, and Christian kingdoms were falling one by one. Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire that had stood for over 1,000 years, was on the verge of collapse. Between the advancing Ottoman Empire and Christian Europe lay Wallachia, a small principality that served as a bloody buffer zone. This is where young Vlad would learn his first lessons in power, born of fear, and fear born of pain. But to truly understand how a prince became a monster, we must expose the moment that ended his childhood. And I warn you, what happened to an 11-year-old boy in an Ottoman fortress explains everything that followed. Sultan Murad II summoned Vlad Dracul for a diplomatic meeting. It was a trap, but Dracul had no choice. He brought his 2 youngest sons, 11-year-old Vlad and 7-year-old Radu, with him. The moment they crossed into Ottoman territory, they were arrested. The Sultan offered Dracul a deal: leave your sons as hostages to guarantee your loyalty or watch them die in front of you. What would you choose, your freedom or your children? Dracul chose his freedom. He rode away, leaving his sons in Ottoman hands. Vlad stood there watching his father disappear into the distance. That was the last moment of his childhood. The Ottoman court claimed they treated noble hostages well, offering education in languages, philosophy, and military tactics. For Radu, Vlad's beautiful younger brother, this was true. Radu thrived, converted to Islam, and became the Sultan's favorite. Some whispered that he became more than just a favorite, but Vlad refused to bend. He spat at his Turkish tutors, refused to learn the Quran, and attacked other hostages who insulted Christianity. For his defiance, the Turks had their ways of breaking stubborn children. The felaka beating the soles of the feet until they split open. The bastinado being hung upside down while guards struck the body with sticks. Starvation, isolation, darkness. But here's a detail historians often omit. During his captivity, Vlad was forced to watch something that would define his future Ottoman execution, specifically the brutal art of impalement. The Turks used impalement for those they considered special enemies, those deserving not just of death but of days of public suffering. Young Vlad watched as prisoners were forced to sit on oiled stakes, their own body weight slowly driving the wood through their insides. He observed how the stakes had to be blunt, not sharp, to avoid piercing vital organs too quickly. He learned that if positioned just right, the stake would travel along the spine, emerging through the shoulder or mouth, keeping the victim alive for days. At just 12 years old, Vlad witnessed these agonizing deaths, filing away every detail. Meanwhile, back in Wallachia, everything fell apart. His father played all sides, Christians, Ottomans, Hungarians, was trying desperately to hold on to his throne. But in 1447, Wallachian nobles, allied with Hungarian regent John Hunyadi, ambushed Vlad Dracul in the marshes near Baltanay. They hacked him to pieces, but they reserved something even more brutal for his older brother Mirch. The Wallachian nobles captured Mirch alive. First they blinded him with hot irons, then while he was still screaming and still alive, they buried him alive. The man who should have been Vlad's protector died choking on dirt, clawing at the earth above him. When word reached the Ottoman court, 16-year-old Vlad received the news with strange calm. His captors expected tears or rage, but instead he simply asked, "How long did my brother take to die underground?" The Ottomans failed to recognize that they were staring at a creature they had created. 6 years of torture hadn't broken Vlad, they had transformed him. Every beating, every humiliation, every forced viewing of impalement taught him not how to submit, but how to inflict. The Ottomans decided Vlad could be useful. They released him with a small force to reclaim his father's throne. His first reign lasted just 2 months before he was driven out. But those 2 months gave a chilling preview of what was to come. Even at 17, Vlad showed unusual cruelty. When a merchant complained about theft, Vlad had the suspect's feet skinned and salt rubbed into the raw flesh. But this was just practice. The real horror was still simmering. For the next 8 years, Vlad served in various armies learning the art of war. He fought alongside the man who had killed his father John Hunyadi because revenge could wait but knowledge could not. He studied fortifications, cavalry tactics, psychological warfare, and most importantly he built a network of supporters who shared his hatred for both the Ottomans and the treacherous boyars. Vlad's moment arrived when, with Hungarian support, he invaded Wallachia again. The current ruler Vladislav II met him in single combat. According to legend, Vlad didn't just kill him, he beheaded him, slowly slicing through his neck while Vladislav still lived. Now here's where the story shifts from violent to truly monstrous. Easter Sunday, 1457. Vlad invited hundreds of boyar families to a feast at his palace in Togovish. These were the people who had betrayed his father, the ones who had buried his brother alive. They arrived dressed in their finest clothes, believing the new prince sought peace. The feast was lavish, wine flowed, music played. Then Vlad stood and asked a simple question. How many princes have you seen rule Wallachia in your lifetime? The boyars, drunk on wine and honesty, gave various answers. Some said 5, others 20, and a few elderly nobles admitted to serving 30 different princes. Each admission was a confession of survival by switching sides, betraying every ruler when it was convenient. Vlad nodded thoughtfully, then signaled his soldiers. In minutes, hundreds of boyars were chained, and Vlad ordered the old and infirm to be impaled on the spot in the courtyard, where they could they could be seen from the feast hall. The screaming began immediately. For the young and strong he had other plans. Still in their fine clothes, they were marched north to a ruined castle. For months they were forced to rebuild Penery Castle stone by stone. They worked until their fine clothes rotted off and then worked naked. When they collapsed from exhaustion, they were impaled. This was just the beginning. I've uncovered documents that show what happened next, shocked even the medieval standards of cruelty. But first, if you're finding these hidden horrors as disturbing as I did, hit that subscribe button. I uncover the darkest truths of history every week, and trust me, Vlad's story gets much worse. Now let me tell you about the incident that earned him his infamous nickname. In 1415, the Saxon merchant city of Brasov had been harboring Vlad's enemies and rival claimants to the throne. Vlad sent them a warning, but the city ignored it. So Vlad brought 20,000 soldiers and showed them exactly what happens when you ignore the dragon's son. He didn't just attack the city, he turned it into a gallery of horror. The Black Church got its name from the fires Vlad set, but fire was merciful compared to what else he did. Men, women and children all impaled in neat rows. Babies were impaled on the same stake as their mothers, positioned at the breast as if nursing. Pregnant women had stakes driven through their wombs. But here's what sets Vlad apart from ordinary tyrants. He set up a table in the middle of this horrors of dying humans. Servants brought him a full meal, roasted meat, fresh bread and wine. Vlad sat and ate, surrounded by thousands of people in various stages of dying. The moaning, the screaming, the begging, it was dinner music to him. One of his boyars couldn't take it. The man covered his nose against the stench of blood and excrement. Vlad noticed and asked, "Does it stink to you?" The boyar admitted it did. "You'll be above the smell up there," Vlad said, and had the man impaled on a stake twice as high as the others. Medieval chroniclers, historians often skip over the most disturbing aspect of Vlad's reign. But according to both German and Russian sources, Vlad developed a particularly grotesque habit. During his mass executions, he would dip his bread in the blood pooling beneath the stakes. The blood-soaked bread became his preferred meal as he dined amidst the dying. His taste for such horrors grew with each passing day, marking a chilling transformation. Conservative estimates of Vlad's death toll range from 40,000 to 80,000, but in a principality with only 500,000 people, he may have killed as much as 20% of his own population, a proportion far exceeding that of even Stalin or Pol Pot. But unlike those dictators, Vlad didn't delegate. He personally oversaw every execution and even innovated new methods. Basic impalement wasn't enough for him. He developed variation stakes through the mouth for liars, through the skull for thieves driven in slowly, with hammers to prolong the agony. Women who committed adultery had stakes driven through their vaginas, emerging through their mouths. He impaled people upside down sideways in patterns that spelled out messages. Two key events would push Vlad from being a cruel ruler to a complete monster. First, he remarried his first wife's name, lost to history, but he had to secure his succession. Second Sultan Mehmed II, the Ottoman conqueror, demanded tribute, not just gold, but 500 boys to be sent to the Janissary Corps to be converted to Islam and trained as soldiers. Vlad's response, he sent the Sultan a message: "Come and get them yourself." When Ottoman envoys arrived to collect the tribute, they refused to remove their turbans in Vlad's presence, citing religious custom. Vlad congratulated them on their devotion, then had their turbans nailed to their skulls with 3-inch iron spikes. The envoys were sent back to Constantinople still alive, still wearing their holy headgear, now permanently attached. This was the kind of response that marked Vlad's reign. When Sultan Mehmed sent an army led by Hamza Pasha to punish Vlad ambushed them at night, capturing thousands. Every single prisoner was impaled, but for Hamza Pasha, Vlad prepared something special. The general was castrated, his genitals stuffed into his mouth, then impaled on a gold-covered stake, because even in torture, rank must be respected. This brings us to 1462, the event that would cement Vlad's reputation forever. Sultan Mehmed, after taking Constantinople personally, led an army of 50,000 men into Wallachia. Some sources even say it was 300,000. Vlad, with maybe 30,000 men including old men and boys, couldn't hope to win a direct battle, so he didn't fight directly. As the Ottoman army advanced, they found a wasteland. Vlad had burned every field, poisoned every well, and evacuated every village. The Turks marched through ash and silence. But that wasn't the worst part. Vlad sent diseased prostitutes into the Ottoman camps, and men infected with the plague infiltrated their ranks. The mighty Ottoman army began dying before a single battle even started. On June 17, 1462, Vlad led a night attack with a small force of his best cavalry infiltrating the Ottoman camp under cover of darkness. His goal, to assassinate Mehmed in his tent and end the invasion with one stroke. Vlad personally led the charge, cutting through guards searching for the Sultan's pavilion, but in the darkness and chaos they hit the wrong tent. Instead of Mehmed, they found the Grand Vizier. The assassination failed, and Vlad and his men barely escaped as the entire Ottoman camp mobilized. The next day, Mehmed continued toward Targovishte, Vlad's capital. The gates were open. No defenders were on the walls. The Sultan suspected a trap, but advanced cautiously. Then they saw it. Wait. Before I describe the most horrific scene in military history, you need to understand the scale. For miles around the city, covering 7 acres, stood wooden stakes, 20,000 of them. And on each stake was a human being in various stages of death and decay. Men, women, children, Turks captured in previous battles, Bulgarian Muslims who had supported the Ottomans, and Wallachian traitors. Some had been dead for weeks, their bodies black with rot, crows pecking at exposed flesh. Others were more recently impaled, still twitching, still moaning. The geometry of the stakes was deliberate. They were arranged in concentric circles like a grotesque garden. The tallest stakes in the center held the highest-ranking victims, Hamza Pasha's gold stake glinting in the middle. His body, long dead, still wore ceremonial armor. The smell made even hardened soldiers vomit. The sight made them weep. These were men who had conquered cities, who had seen Byzantine Constantinople fall, but this was beyond warfare, this was madness given form. Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who ended the 1,000-year Byzantine Empire, looked at this forest of the dead and spoke words that would echo through history. I cannot take the land of a man who does such things. What can one do against such a demon? He turned his army around. The man who never retreated, retreated. But here's the truly disturbing part. Vlad considered this his masterpiece. While Mehmed fled, Vlad walked among the stakes like an artist in his gallery. He adjusted bodies that had slipped, noting which angles of impalement lasted the longest. This wasn't just psychological warfare, this was pleasure. One captured Turkish chronicle often omitted from sanitized history's records that Vlad would visit the impalement fields at night alone. He would sit among the dying and listen to their moans like music. He would touch the stakes to feel the vibrations of the struggling bodies. He would bring wine and toast the dying. This is who Vlad really was, not a patriot defending Christianity, not a harsh but necessary ruler, but a man who found joy in human suffering pushed to its absolute limit. The Ottomans eventually left, but they left behind Vlad's brother Radu with troops. Remember, Radu was Vlad's beautiful younger brother. Radu, the brother who had thrived in Ottoman captivity, returned to Wallachia, offering the people a simple choice. Support him and live in peace, or stay loyal to the impaling madman and face certain torment. It wasn't a hard decision to make. Vlad's own nobles abandoned him, and his army began to disband. By August 1462, he was fleeing to Hungary, desperately seeking help from King Matthias Corvinus. But Matthias had already been in contact with the Ottomans. When Vlad arrived, he was arrested and imprisoned for 12 long years. He rotted away in Hungarian captivity, but even in prison, his twisted obsession never ceased. Guards reported finding dead rats carefully impaled on splinters in his cell, small birds skewered on sharpened quills, and miniature impalement fields made with insects pinned to pieces of wood. When asked why, he simply replied that he didn't want to lose his skill. Think about that, 12 years in a cell, and his primary concern was maintaining his ability to torture living things. The guards were so disturbed by these grotesque acts that they stopped bringing him anything that could be sharpened. As politics shifted, Hungary found itself needing allies against the Ottomans again. Vlad was released, given a Hungarian noble bride, and converted to Catholicism, all for political gain. With his new alliance, he received troops to reclaim Wallachia. His third reign began in 1476. He was older now, in his 40s, but the cruelty had only intensified. If anything, imprisonment had fermented it into something far worse. The impalements resumed immediately, but now he added a new layer of psychological torment. He forced families to watch as each member was impaled, starting with the children, then the mothers, and finally the fathers. He even developed a method of impalement that kept victims alive for up to a week. One story from this period is so grotesque that even contemporary chroniclers hesitated to record it. A group of Turkish prisoners was brought before Vlad, and he had them impaled in a specific pattern, shorter stakes in front, taller ones behind, creating an amphitheatre of agony. In the centre, he had a pregnant woman impaled vertically. As she died over several hours, she gave birth on the stake. The baby, of course, died immediately. Vlad watched the entire process, taking notes on how long each stage took. This wasn't warfare, and it wasn't even madness. This was evil so pure it defies comprehension. By December 1476, Vlad, now older and even more savage, was marching with a small force when he was ambushed by Ottoman troops. The details of his death vary. Some say he was assassinated by his own men, tired of serving a monster. Others say the Turks overwhelmed him. What we do know is that Vlad the Impaler died in battle. His head was severed from his body and sent to Constantinople, where Sultan Mehmed II had it displayed on a stake above the city gates. There's a certain dark poetry in that the Impaler finally impaled, even if only in death. His body was supposedly buried at Snagov Monastery, but when archaeologists opened his supposed tomb in 931, they found it empty. Some say the monks, horrified by the evil they had to bury, moved the body. Others whispered darker theories. But Vlad's death didn't mark the end of his story. You might expect me to talk about Bram Stoker and the vampire legends, but I'm not. Because the true horror of Vlad's legacy, the real horror of Vlad the Impaler, isn't just in the sheer brutality of his actions, but in the fact that today in Romania, he is considered a national hero. Yes, you heard that right. The man who murdered 80,000 people who dined on blood-soaked bread while watching children die on stakes, who impaled babies on their mothers' breasts. This man is celebrated with statues, his face adorns tourist merchandise, and Romanian nationalists praise him as a defender of Christianity and a bulwark against Islamic invasion. They focus on his resistance to the Ottomans and ignore the screaming forests of the dead. They celebrate his harsh justice, claiming he made Wallachia so safe that a golden cup could be left at a public fountain without being stolen. They don't mention that this safety came from terror so absolute that people were afraid to breathe wrong. This is the real horror. Not that monsters exist, but that we rehabilitate them, finding ways to excuse the inexcusable because the monster was on our side. Vlad didn't impale 20,000 Turks because he was defending Christianity. He did it because he enjoyed it. He impaled Christians too. He impaled anyone who gave him an excuse, and when he ran out of excuses, he made them up. Medieval rulers were brutal out of necessity, but Vlad was brutal by choice, by preference, by pleasure. Other rulers of his time used execution as a tool. Vlad used it as entertainment. Other rulers killed enemies. Vlad killed randomly merchants who looked at him wrong, women who cooked meals he didn't like, children who cried too loudly. He once impaled a group of foreign ambassadors for being too well dressed, saying their finery insulted Wallachian simplicity. The German tales tell of Vlad encountering a peasant with a torn shirt. When the man confirms he has a wife, Vlad has her impaled for not properly caring for her husband's clothing. Then he gives the man a new wife with a warning: keep your husband better dressed or join your predecessor. This wasn't justice. This was a man so damaged by childhood trauma, so twisted by years of watching Ottoman cruelty that he became worse than his tormentors. The Ottomans impaled enemies. Vlad impaled everyone. The Ottomans used torture for informational punishment. Vlad used it for pleasure. Modern psychologists studying historical records classify Vlad as a sadistic psychopath with probable sexual dysfunction. Many of his impalement methods targeted sexual organs, his childhood trauma, his forced observation of torture, and his powerlessness as a hostage mirror classic serial killer development. Except this serial killer had an army and a country. But perhaps the most chilling detail comes from those who knew him personally. They describe a man who was cultured, intelligent, even charming when he chose to be. He spoke multiple languages, wrote poetry, and understood theology and philosophy. He wasn't a mindless brute, he was worse. He was a brilliant mind that chose to use its gifts for creating the most exquisite suffering possible. Russian chronicles describe foreign merchants visiting Vlad's court. He treats them well, shows them hospitality, and then as they're leaving, he casually mentions that he had their servants impaled while they dined just to see if they'd notice. They didn't. He laughs and lets them discover the bodies on their way out. This is what true evil looks like, not raving madness, but calm, calculated cruelty delivered with a smile. In his final letter written days before his death, Vlad complains that his Hungarian allies don't let him impale as freely as he'd like. Even in the face of a massive Ottoman invasion, his main concern is that he can't torture enough people. That's who Vlad really was, a man so addicted to human suffering that limiting his torture quota was worse than military defeat. When that Turkish sword finally took his head, it wasn't the killing of a defender of Christendom, it was the extermination of a rabid animal that happened to wear a crown. The real horror of Vlad the Impaler wasn't just in the bloodshed he caused, it was in how he reveled in it, and how even today his name is celebrated as a hero. Dracula didn't fear crosses or sunlight. He didn't drain blood with fangs. He did something far worse. He proved that with enough childhood trauma and unchecked power, a human being could become more monstrous than any myth. He showed us that the worst horrors don't come from supernatural creatures, but from damaged humans given the opportunity to spread their damage. 20,000 corpses rotting on stakes, babies dying on their mothers' breasts, children forced to watch their parents impaled, pregnant women giving birth while dying on poles. This isn't legend. This isn't exaggeration. This is history recorded by multiple sources from multiple nations, all painting the same picture of evil incarnate. But here's the final, most disturbing truth about Vlad the Impaler. His terror tactics worked. The Ottomans hesitated to invade Wallachia for years after his death. His name became a curse one Turkish mothers used to frighten their children. Behave, or Kazakh voyvoda will get you. The Impaler Prince, a man so terrible that even conquering armies turned back rather than face what he might do, and somewhere in the blood-soaked ground of Wallachia in the earth that absorbed the bodily fluids of 80,000 impaled victims, something dark took root. Not vampirism, reality doesn't need supernatural embellishments, but the idea that ultimate cruelty equals ultimate power. Fear, stronger than any army. A single twisted individual who could make empires retreat simply by doing what others wouldn't. Vlad didn't just kill people. He killed the idea that humans have limits to their cruelty. He proved that with enough trauma and power, anyone can become a devil. And he proved that sometimes devils win. The forest of corpses outside Targovishte wasn't just a war crime. It was a mission statement. It said, "This is what a human being is capable of, this is what I am capable of, and I enjoy it." Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, who had seen cities burn and empires fall, looked at that forest and saw something that conquering couldn't fix, something that winning couldn't cure. He saw the face of human evil stripped of all pretense, all justification, all humanity, and he ran. We should all run from men like Vlad, but instead we put their faces on coins and call them heroes. We focus on their victories and ignore their victims. We pretend their ends justified their means. They didn't. They never do. And until we stop making heroes of monsters, we'll keep creating more Vlads, more forests of the impaled, more proof that the real Dracula doesn't need fangs, just power and a damaged soul. Vlad III died in the winter of 1476, his head decorating a Turkish spike. But his legacy that humans can surpass any fictional monster in cruelty that lives forever. Every dictator who uses terror, every killer who finds pleasure in pain, every damaged child who grows up to damage others, they are all children of Vlad the Impaler, the man who made hell on earth and called it justice. If Vlad's level of sadistic cruelty shocked you, wait until you discover what Gilda did to hundreds of children in his castle. Murders so horrific they make Vlad look merciful. Subscribe for more suppressed historical truths, and I'll see you in the next investigation. Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.